Our stories serve as windows that provide a peek into our souls. Shared with others, they allow us to connect more powerfully and deeply. Jonathan Jackson is a son, a brother, a friend, and successful entrepreneur. And what follows is his story of self-discovery, adversity, and triumph. Welcome to the Lives of Men. Thank you, brother. Thanks for being here. I feel like we've been on a collision course to meet, so we finally made it. Jonathan, man, what's going on, brother?
Good, man.
How you feeling?
I'm feeling good, man. Happy to be here.
Man, indeed. Likewise. Happy to have you. And it's been, like I said, man, we've gotten connected over the last couple weeks, and I feel like we've been on a collision course to meet. We have a lot of mutual friends.
Definitely.
And, no coincidence. I do feel like when people are aligned and they're on a particular path, we're just bound to meet. So I'm so humbled, man, and honored that you're here and that we're going to have this conversation because I think it's much needed.
I appreciate that.
So thanks again. I want to get into your story, brother. I want to get into who you are, and we're going to walk our audience through kind of your personal story all the way through today, right? Just really diving deep. We might get into some deeper topics, so I hope you're ready for it.
Of course, let's do it.
But I think again, it's much needed. So tell us about who you are, man. Where you come from, your upbringing, etc.
Yeah, so I was born in New Hampshire, which is like the last place people would assume somebody like me would be from. I have a really, really big West Indian family, so
Trini, right?
Trini, that's what both of our Trinis. Yeah, they're all on Flatbush or Toronto or London or in Trinidad. So both sides of my family are that, but my dad's side of the family is a little more southern. So my parents met and then they moved to get closer to my grandparents. So I'm the baby, so I have an older brother. And like growing up, when I was really, really young, I was always like really, really curious. Like I was always this sort of like inquisitive kid who had questions and I wanted to know about other stuff. And I was sort of just like, my mom would describe me as sort of just like had boundless energy. I like run around. I was hard to corral.
And tell me a little bit more about your Caribbean upbringing, because I'm from the Dominican Republic, right? And so I know that we have a lot of similarities in terms of culture. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, man, I think the biggest part that plays the role now is just like family. Like I just have growing up, like you always knew you were related to someone, and the key was like when you walked in the house, you didn't always know who that person was to you, but they knew you through someone else. So even now, sometimes people won't know who I am, but they'll be like, oh, you're Francis's grandson, because it's about facial structure. So my mom and I have the same birthday, and we like look the exact same. So when I show up places and they don't know me, they know my mom. So the calling card is usually like really, really genetic.
Oh, you're a Jackson.
It's like you're a Preddy, you're Nola's son, you're Nola's baby. People won't even know who you are. They'll ice grill you when you get in, and then someone else will be like, that's Nola's grandson, and the whole mood shifts. Like the energy's just different. So it was that. I think it was also just like a really interesting sense of duty. Like you have a responsibility to make sure that whatever you have, you are providing. And so there's an interesting juxtaposition between like the pressure of being a provider that you learn from everybody. It's actually very interesting. I'd say I come from a fairly matriarchal household, and that the women I grew up around are all sort of breadwinners, and they were all educated, and they were also sort of providers. And in many respects, they did a lot of emotional labor for other people. So
would you say that that's more prevalent than not as it relates to Caribbean families being matriarchal, right? Because you would think that usually they're more patriarchal in nature, right?
I can't really call it. I know mine, like my grandfather just had 4 daughters. So like just the structure of how that, he had no sons. So like all I have are aunts, right? So I think the setup of that is just one of those things where that's sort of how it played out. I don't actually think you can call it that way. I think there's a trope or an archetype of sort of like very, very strong, fierce Caribbean women. For the most part, I found that to be true. Obviously, they're layered, they're complex, so you can't necessarily just make that the only end-all, be-all. But yeah, I do think that has played a pretty strong role in how I've been like socialized growing up. Like I've never had sort of this discomfort around, I'd say, like women who are powerful. I'd say like my friend group is like comprised of a lot of those women, which has been helpful. There are other issues that I have, but I think that was one of them that I'm really grateful that I had that exposure.
No, I can totally relate to that because like you, my family is very matriarchal as well.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about the appreciation that you have for the female strength coming out of that. So let's talk about your family structure, your immediate family structure. You said you had an older brother, you and your dad, you and your mom, and your dad. Talk to us about that dynamic growing up.
Yeah, so growing up, it was really interesting. So my parents have been married, I think they're going on like probably like 37, 38 years of marriage, right? And so there's a really strong model of that I've always had, of them sort of like working through things. I think when I was little, you always see things with sort of like rosy tinted glasses, and you sort of have, that superhero complex where like for me, like my mom and dad were both superheroes for what they did. One of the things that I think most people don't know about me, so I had a little sister. So when I was, born when I was 5.
I was going to get there, so I'm glad you got there.
Yeah, so I'll just hop in. So I was born when I was 5, died when I was 6, and she had Down syndrome, but she had a heart complication. So, her heart valve doesn't pump fast enough to deliver blood, right? And so she lived for 14 months. So I was like the youngest, then I was like the middle, then I became the youngest again. So I think for anybody that's been through any sort of like trauma or lost a sibling, like there's an inherent tension that gets built, and there's grief like in that nuclear family. I think for me, my mom, my dad, my brother, like going through that, like everybody's relationship changed. The grief that I was experiencing was very different because I was like growing, and so I would just have these like moments where I was just like full of energy, and some of that energy was because I had like unspent grief, and so it affected, I'd say, like my development in that I was just always like moving and doing stuff. So my mom actually put me in gymnastics because it was the one thing that could actually calm me down. Yeah. Growing up where I grew up, like that was sort of all I had. Like I needed to have sort of that grounding, and my parents did a really good job of making sure that they never ever pretended like they had the answers.
So you say that trauma is what informed you as you kind of develop in adolescence. How would you say that it affected you in hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, like I just grew up fast, man. Yeah. I'm 6. We got people coming to the house. We got a big funeral. She lived for 14 months. Like everybody felt
She had a personality.
She had a personality, man. Like, but my thing is like, you grow up and your little siblings like on oxygen, and like you got physical therapists coming to the house, and like, play dates were different, right? She had to have, PT at like, if you've ever seen like an 8-month-old in PT, you got like, you like our play dates, like we put her on like those big exercise balls and like roll her back and forth. Like it was totally different. And like I took that job seriously. And so one of the ways it affected me was like I had this, what I call like an older sibling complex, where like if I look at a lot of my relationships, like I felt like I got robbed of being like an older sibling. And like I think for me, it's made me sort of, it probably doubled, maybe even tripled my age. So I'm at 6 dealing with like emotions that I don't even have the lexicon for the word, not because I can't do it, but I'm 6. Right. Like I don't actually know how I'm feeling. I just know that like there was a person in my life, we shared a room, and then one day, she stopped breathing, and then the crib's in my room, but I don't see her. And then everybody's, upset, nobody's talking to each other. Yeah. And so like that kind of stress doesn't go away. I think you grow into how you deal and cope and sort of evolve.
High school, I know you went through a pretty significant event that changed, even who you are today and how you operate. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so high school for me, I ended up applying to boarding school. And so got there, begged my mom to let me play football. She's like, I don't know. My dad was like, let him play football, right? Started playing football. Second game in, make a tackle, wrap up.
Second game in?
Second game in, yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
JV, I'm just like trying to earn my stripes, make a tackle. Yeah. I'm getting up from the tackle, get hit in the back of the head, and I just like fall forward. I went to a really well-resourced high school, like really, really large endowment. So they had like concussion testing, all that stuff to make sure like kids were good.
So just to be clear, is the same concussion testing that the NFL has in place?
Yeah, it was the same, yeah. So back when this happened to me in like 06, so it was the same kind of like technology they would use to like sit somebody down and like walk them through, like here's the concussion test, here's what you do. Like there's a series of like what feel like numerical games to make sure like if your brain is actually having retention. So I failed the first one, I'm like, okay, come back a week later, fail it again, keep failing these tests.
How many? 9 times, I
Yeah,
think,
I
right?
took a test about 9 times,
Wow.
failed each one. And he did this battery of tests and came out of the testing group, and I was there with my parents, and he was like, okay, so out of every 100 concussions, like 10 are mild, right? Cool. Out of that 10, there's usually 1 out of 100 that you sustain semi-permanent brain damage. Like something happened here and your brain hit the front of your skull and it affected your ability to have short-term recall.
So how did that change how you learn, your process of learning and even socializing, right? Like how did that change?
I just had to become really process oriented, right? So I had to figure out a scheme to like remember stuff. So I went to the school store, I bought 2 extra planners. I kept 1 in my backpack, 1 on my desk, and 1 on me at all times. So I knew if I was in class and I forgot we had blocks, with A block, B block, C block. So if I forgot if I was in C block.
So you were literally in class and you would forget?
Yeah, I would be in algebra, legitimately I'd be in algebra. I'd sit down, I'd get to the building, about to open my backpack, and I forget what building I had just walked into, what class, and sometimes I had already forgotten what book. So I would pack the wrong books for the right class. So I'd show up to the right class with the wrong books. And it, like, how do you tell other adolescent kids that? Like, how do you like tell your homies that you just met, I'm forgetting things about who I am.
Yeah.
I know we just met. Can you help me with the homework? Right. Like, no one can. Like, I didn't have a rubric for how to do that. And I'm like one of like maybe 15, 20 black kids. And already on top of that, I think I felt like a lot of people thought I was faking it. Like a lot.
And
of
you're in
people
the
thought I was
middle of
making up.
puberty, brother.
Yeah,
Like,
and I'm just like, wow, like my body's changing.
Right.
This is awkward, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm just trying to figure it all out. And that was the first time I sort of felt anxiety. It was like I would just wake up anxious because I felt like I couldn't tell anybody the truth because they would laugh or they would make fun of me, or I'm in this environment where like I'm in front of like enormous types of wealth. Like I didn't go to school with just like rich kids. I went to school with people who have like Vanderbilt, Rockefeller money. And so, you're sort of playing on that level and you step down, and then my school has 100% graduation rate. So I'm like, well, I just let the family down. Like I who am I right now if I'm not smart? It was dark for me. Like I was depressed. I was on 20 milligrams of citalopram every morning, right? So just like something to actually help me like level out. And that was sort of that first time where I had to really come to grips with sort of like there was a chemical imbalance. And you start to sort of demystify my own biases that I had around sort of mental health because no one else in my sphere was talking about it.
Yeah, we'll get into some mental health issues in a minute.
Yeah.
Cool.